Hi, it's Dave from Telescribe and Nothing Gained. And on this video today, we also have Andy from Nomadic Rain and Kirk Houghton from Screen Blast Repeat, and you are watching A.D.K. Rock and Metal. Okay, on today's video, we are doing another look at another classic album. We want to talk about it for a particular reason, but I think it's quite relevant. We should talk about why we're putting this video out and not particularly why some people might think we're putting this video out. So we looked at this video a few weeks ago or came up with this video, and we're actually recording this the day after the lead frontman, the legend himself, the Prince of Darkness, Ozzy Osbourne, has passed away. But we'd planned to do this a little while ago because it's the 50th anniversary of this particular album, and this is the album Sabotage. And we wanted to kind of look back at it and do our usual album breakdown. Does it still stand up, etc. So it's a little bit more, even more, bit more poignant us doing this now. It doesn't mean we're not going to be as critical as we might be on any of the songs, etc., and vocals or anything like that. But it's a bit of a sad day, even though watching back to the beginning and seeing how frail he was, and he did a great performance. You could tell he was putting everything he could into that performance. But it's so weird to think 2 weeks later and he's gone. So yeah, we've got that in the back of our mind, I guess. But we are here to talk about Sabotage, so let's get it. We're going to talk about that one. So it came out in 1975. I'm going to hand over to Kirk, who's going to give us a bit of a background on this particular album.
The sixth album of their career and released in 1975, Sabotage is one of the last great records in the Black Sabbath canon before they entered the tumult of the next 25 years. Indeed, the band were embroiled in litigation against their former manager Patrick Meehan during the recording of this album, even receiving affidavits in the studio. Clearly, the wheels were starting to come off at this point, with band relations disintegrating. Nevertheless, Tony Iommi was determined to return the band to a simpler rock-based sound after the experimentation of Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. But Sabotage is not a simple record. Indeed, it contains some of the most ambitious material and is a far cry from the doom-laden heaviness of the first three albums. Commercially, the LP peaked at number 7 in the UK and number 28 in the US Billboard charts, failing to achieve gold status until 1997 in the United States. By contrast, their 1970 album Paranoid has shifted 12 million copies worldwide to date. Yeah, this album is anything but a failure in hindsight. Its influence on new wave of British heavy metal, prog metal and early thrash metal is immense, and many fans identify it as the hidden gem in their legendary first 6 records. Indeed, members of Metallica, Alice in Chains and Soundgarden have praised Sabotage for its forward-thinking approach and willingness to expand the boundaries of rock and heavy metal.
Okay, so there we go. So that was all about Sabotage. So, Kirk, do you want to kick us through and take us through our concept? And obviously, we'll talk about it.
Yeah, I think we always like to start by picking out our 2 favourite songs and the reasons why.
Okay.
So we normally throw it to you, Andy. What were the 2 songs that stood out for you on this 8-track album?
Just a bit of background and context. I've never heard this before. In fact, might be surprising to you two and people who watch and follow the channel and who know me personally. I've never owned a Black Sabbath album either. I've got a couple of compilations, and on the one that I've had the longest and know and played the most, none of these tracks appear on it. So the majority of this is all brand new to me, and we'll obviously sort of dive into sort of more details as we go on. But in answer to your initial discussion point, my favourite 2 tracks are Hole in the Sky and Symptom of the Universe. Do you want to expand?
Please do.
Please.
Yeah.
Always. Yeah.
It was a difficult choice, to be honest, because I was thinking about the best way of sort of describing this sort of earlier today, and there's a lot of chaff and not enough wheat. You know, there's not much from this album that I've taken away from. I mean, it's grown on me over the sort of 5 or 6 times I've listened to it over the last week or so. Um, Most poignantly, yesterday evening when Dave messaged our chat and told us about Ozzy's passing, I was actually halfway through the album writing notes. And I was actually listening to it on sort of decent equipment rather than my work van, which only got one speaker. So through my phone on sort of fairly decent headphones, I got sort of the full flavour of the album. But so that was the most enjoyable sort of listen through for me. But Holding the Sky just sort of kicks things off really well. I think that there's some power in Ozzy's vocals. It's sort of mid-tempo. It's very recognisable. It's got that earworm kind of feel to it. You sort of recall the main riff quite well. But I don't know if it's just the version I've listened to or whether you can sort of agree. It just seems to end. It's almost like the recording prematurely ends, in error rather than it sort of concluding the song. And it like almost immediately goes into the next track, which there's not much to say about that, but I'll talk about that later. And coincidentally, it just leads on to my second favourite track. I mean, I can't differentiate between the two, but Simpson the Universe. Again, it's got. I did kind of recognise the main riff, and that's sort of another one that sticks in the head. It's got a real good sort of repeat value that sticks in the mind. I'm pretty sure I haven't heard the Sabbath version, but I have heard the cover versions, and I sort of had a look through which bands had covered it, and it sort of rang true with the Pantera and Sepultura ones that I have heard. It's quite a recognisable title as well. I'm sure other bands have covered it. I might have even seen live, I don't know. But interestingly, in the lyrics, because I was watching them sort of scroll through as the song was playing, the phrase or the line 700 Unicorn, not quite sure what it means, but there is a band I've seen, a two-piece sludge from Milton Keynes. I think they supported Everest Queen, who are a Hertfordshire based band, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe at the Red Line in Stevenage, I'm not sure, but that stuck in my mind. Majority of that song is really good, the first 2/3 or so, but then it goes a bit sort of freeform jazz jamming session at the end, which could have been stripped back. It's quite a sort of lengthy track anyway, but to kick off our discussion, they're my favourite two off this album.
Go on, Dave. I bet one of those two is in yours, isn't it?
Of course. So I agree with Simpson of the Universe, mainly because I knew it from the Sepultura version. And that was what I knew when I heard the Sepultura version of it. I was, must have been 15, 16. Played it as a cover in the band I was in at the time, one of my very, very first bands. That was the first one. Trying to learn that drum fill for the changes, which is still chaotic as hell and is amazing. It's a really interesting one because you've got that. I don't remember in the Sepultura version it ever having that second part of the song, and it is effectively this is two songs. There is absolutely no reason for this bit at the end of it, really, in the context of a musical element. Probably from a vocal point of view, but from a musical point, you kind of try and work out why they did it. But I think it's a great example from them in what I would class as the classic down-picking rhythm guitar that we expected from like the 80s thrash bands like Metallica and stuff like that. It's one of the few times you really hear them going for it. There's a lot more blues in a lot of the other tracks, whereas this is a much more in-your-face. This is a rock stroke metal track, which I love. The other song that I could have gone for "Hole in the Sky." This is that. That is a very much probably the only song on here that in my head reminds me and makes me think of Sabbath. Is "Hole in the Sky." Everything else on here reminds me of other bands. But am I going insane? Is the one that I really liked on this album.
I'm surprised. Okay, why?
Because it's got a disco rock vibe on it, which it's catchy. It's got a 60s, 70s vibe to it. It's actually closer to where Ozzy went with some of his work. He went off in a real weird tangent, and as a whole, when you're talking about this album, and I agree. When you if you go back and listen to something like Masters of Reality, for instance, or Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. doesn't sound like this, but this you've got to remember they wrote 8 albums in 8 years. So 1970 to 1978, they put out 8 albums. Who does that nowadays? No one does that. People nowadays spend 3 years crafting an album, and they were just like knocking them out like sweeties. They're like, here's another one, here's another one, here's another one. So I question whether or not there was quality control in their album writing, or were they just kind of like, let's get some up, that'll do, that's another track. And that's where some of these songs feel like is, we've written this track, we'll whack this on the end. Yeah, that's good enough. Whack it in, record it. Done. Next song, next song. Right, we've got 8. Whack it on an album. Let's get back out on the road again. And that's what when you go through them in like Technical Ecstasy, etc., you start looking at the transition. And if you went to the first album, then you go up to the 1978s, and then you go into the Dio area, this is almost a sacrificial lamb of that transitional period. You've got 8 albums, and there's probably about 4 albums worth of really good material, and there's 4 albums worth of complete and utter crap, in a way, in my opinion. There is some stuff in here that just doesn't make a lot of sense. Musically, it doesn't stand up well today. Some people will love it, though, but if you were talking about the legacy of Sabbath, metal, there is some stuff in here I'm kind of like, okay, not too sure about. But am I going to say I enjoy it because it's so different on the album? But if you had done Am I Going Insane and you put it on Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, you'd be like, what? That's not a Sabbath. If you had put this on there and said to someone who'd never heard of Black Sabbath or had only ever heard really early Black Sabbath and said, Am I Going Insane? They'd be like, that's not Sabbath. That's just not. But I think it's a really interesting one because it does lead you to where Ozzy went a little bit more with his solo stuff and some of his experimentation. But what about you, Kirk?
Before we move on, Dave, you said about Am I Going Insane having that sort of 60s vibe and a bit sort of chilled.
Disco, yeah.
To me, it reminded of the Spinal Tap song that they supposedly did in the 60s. Listen to the Flower People.
Flower People, yeah.
That's what came to mind for me on that particular one.
The flower people say.
Lyrically, topics I thought is it kind of a follow-up to Paranoid, or similar vein as Paranoid.
Yeah.
Interesting comments on that.
Yeah, I'll pick up from that. Well, I'll give you my 2 favourites. We all agree on Symptom of the Universe. I think because of its influence on thrash metal. And it's definitely the heaviest riff on the album, and the band Venom made a career out of that riff for their first 2 albums, which many people cite as the beginning of thrash, even blackened thrash, certainly extreme metal. I think this is also where you hear the influence of Black Sabbath on the new wave of British heavy metal, though. Iron Maiden are playing these types of riffs, aren't they? They're just forming around this time, aren't they? 1975.
Yeah.
And I don't think people appreciate just how much of an influence Sabbath are on the bands that are seen as faster than them, Judas Priest and Maiden being the best 2 examples. If you actually look at the riff, thrash metal just takes the same techniques and just adds double time in drums and uses triplets, doesn't it, for the rhythm? So they basically sped up what Black Sabbath are doing here, and we have thrash metal. I like Bill Ward's playing on here, very expressive. He rolls everywhere. You'll have noticed that, Dave. They don't seem superfluous to me, though. It also helps, doesn't it? Because there is that element of you can hear them jamming as well. And sometimes when you go into a transition, just let a power chord ring and let the drums, get settled for the next part. And he's fantastic at that. And I think when you get to this song at track number 3, to me, track number 1, Hole in the Sky, I don't think that is vintage Black Sabbath. It's too conventional. They actually have a chorus in that song, which they hardly put in any of their songs. And I understand why, because I was reading up on it, and Tony Iommi, after Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, said, I want to go back to writing a bit more of a simple rock album, because that one is very experimental. But yeah, I think there is a lot of tasty transitions on this. Now, you 2 aren't too keen, are you, on the second half of it? But to me, I think once you get to 3 minutes, 15 seconds, and it's going to evolve into like a riff suite with highly technical modulations to new tempos, there's this amazing shredding fretboard activity, which is clearly proto thrash metal as well. And often when you listen to this, it's like, is he overdubbing? He is at points, but the bass is so fucking loud and heavy,
Yeah.
and often not just following the guitar that you don't even realize when it's dropped out. There's no band on this planet that does it better than Black Sabbath for that, with the sound of the bass filling in. But yeah, I like that last part. It's very colourful, the melodic folk guitar and the percussion
I
as well.
like it. It's just, yeah, on certain other ones, when you talk about songs like Megalomania and how that kicks in with like almost a jazz odyssey that then goes into a hard rocks, there are certain times you have to, you almost want to go and pick the brains of the band and go, I really want to understand the writing process that went into this because that's not a standardized structure at all. And you're
Yeah,
trying to then put it towards it. I mean, you're almost getting into
it's
I mean,
progressive rock, really, isn't it?
progressive rock, yeah. So
Yeah.
you're getting into that sort of area. You're getting into like early Dream here to kind of
Yeah, the
structure
influence
it.
there.
And yeah.
Definitely. And I'll move on. Actually, Megalomania, track number 4, was my second favorite. 9 minutes,
Okay.
41 seconds. There is a lot going on in this song, isn't it? It's easily the
Mm.
most complex and ambitious track. I like how for the first 2 minutes, it's really Geezer Butler just threading with his bass, isn't it? And I think Ozzy is less rigid in his vocal lines here, and it's probably the darkest song. It's very introspective. But as you said, when that iconic riff comes in, it almost goes into glam rock territory, like David Bowie, T-Rex, what you'd hear for
Yeah.
the riffs they're playing. I mean, ironically, they actually did influence T-Rex when you listen to a song like Children of the Revolution. It's just Black Sabbath riff, isn't it, that they're playing? But interesting use of technology, vocal loops, probably a new thing in 1975 on Ozzy's vocals. And part 1 does concentrate on a verse chorus structure, but part 2, yeah, I mean, Andy, you know that Black Sabbath obviously are the godfathers of doom metal. There is no doom metal on this record, is there? I mean, it didn't exist as a thing. Don't get me wrong, that term. But yeah, this is progressive rock to me. I even think that the rigidity of the chorus works in Ozzy's favor here. You know, it's was it wise to disguise how I tried to get away from you now? Do you know
Yeah.
you said that Symphony Universe, there's 2 songs mashed together? There's 3 songs
There is,
patched
yeah.
together here, aren't they? And I don't know if you two are keen on that, but yeah, where would Judas Priest and Iron Maiden be without the heavy riff here? And where do you think Metallica's Load and Reload, the inspiration for that came from? And even Megadeth's Euthanasia, they're
Mm.
drawing directly from this song and are not ashamed to admit it. But yeah, interesting. I expected us all to pull out track number 3, Symptom of the Universe. But Andy, what are the high points of this album for you? Because it sounds like you couldn't really get into it.
Yeah. Can I just add a few comments about Megalomania? Because that was
Sure.
one of your favourites. I mean, Dave, you often use the phrase that there's a good 3-minute song
Yeah.
as Kirk said, that this is thick end of 10 minutes. And to me, the first part is, you know, a bit psychedelic, you know, progressive rock, slow tempo, haunting vocals. But then, sort of about 3.5 minutes, the classic cowbell comes in,
Yeah.
and there's a really good. I've described it as sort of like a sort of Scorpions, Van Halen type riff. I mean, you said glam rock, which is a good description, and basically that's the rest of the song, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
when it'll play through that riff, and then there's a solo and the vocals, and then it'll stop, and then the cowbell comes in, and then it comes in again, and I think on the third time there's this very sort of strange fuzzy guitar effect over the guitar sound as well. But I mean, I've called it messy. I don't think it's quite messy, but yeah, it's just, you know, it's an interesting one because it's, you know, it doesn't seem like it drags on. It was probably my third best track of the album. But your question was highs and lows. Yeah, I mean, there weren't many highs, but I think I probably touched on the highs. I mean, the low point for me are some of the, you know, the filler, you know, the chaff. Dave, you said, are they just getting in the recording studio and saying, well, that'll do, stick it on the album, that's you know, that's part of the 8 tracks, let's get it done, get it recorded, let's get out on the road again. I mean, Don't Start is like
Yeah.
50 minutes of
No,
50
just don't
seconds.
start. Just don't
yeah,
start.
don't start. Maybe that's what they're thinking. And if it is an intro, as it leads into Symptom of the Universe, why isn't it an intro to that rather than a standalone track? I mean, it's 50 seconds. What else is there regarding that? Yeah, there's just far too many sort of experimental parts, maybe, or maybe sort of sections that haven't been sort of thought out or practiced or constructed particularly well, and just stuck on the end or the beginning of songs. So there's the low points. I mean, high points is just the sort of the sort of beastinish tracks that I've already mentioned, but it's not one that I'm ever going to perhaps revisit. The ones I've mentioned are on the compilations, and they are the high points that I might return to. But as an album, I don't think I'll be reviewing this one again or listen to again.
Go on, Dave. I think you enjoyed it more than Andy, didn't you?
So, I think, as Sandy said, the more you listen to it, the more you enjoy it, because you go in there. I did have this album years ago. I had this, and I listened to it once and then never listened to it again.
Oh.
Is it just because prior to that I had a greatest hits compilation type one of Sabbath, and as you said, none of the songs were on that, and I was like, okay, I'll get this next Sabbath one. And I'm like, this doesn't sound like anything like any. It doesn't sound like War Pigs and I Am Man or Paranoid. What the fuck is this thing? I was like, this ain't Sabbath. So I didn't get it at the time. But I did enjoy the album as a whole. I think I completely agree with Andy. There is the chaff on there. So yeah, don't start too late. It's just pointless to me. And Supers are a bit self-indulgent, aimless. That almost like a soundtrack to something like Dr. Zhivago soundtrack. It's going to be on or something stupid. Like it doesn't make any sense within the context of what I was listening to as an album. But also, that can also be a high point of an album, is that if you go in there, we're looking at it from an experimentation point of view and trying to sort of see what the band were doing, it can actually be quite enjoyable to kind of do the mental workout of going, okay, I can see where maybe the band got there, and I'm intrigued by it. But if you just want to listen to a song and rock out, and it's a hard album to get through on that one. And I think the other thing I would say around this one, probably it's cool in a way, but it's, as I was saying, this is a transitional album. There are elements on this album where they're starting to sound far too much like Led Zeppelin. Like
Yeah, we acknowledge that.
The Rit is, I mean, literally, it's a Led Zeppelin rip-off. Great blues rock track. And on the Rit, I mean, you listen to Ozzy. If you didn't tell me that was Ozzy, I would have thought it was Robert Plant. Because you just aren't. It's just sounded like him, and I was like, there's only a couple of times where he was singing in this register that's much higher. I'm like, you're doing rock vocals here. You're sounding like Led Zeppelin, and you can think, well, they've started here. They're moving towards this metal sound, but they haven't discovered what metal is at this point. We're in 1975. We haven't got metal at this point, so we've got to get to that last journey. So they're going from their bluesy doom riffs. They're now going into hard rock. They're going to get to that classic rock when Dio joins, and you're going to get some real great early kind of metal. But the problem is they weren't known for being metal Sabbath at that point. They were doomy, bluesy sort of stuff. So when then Judas Priest take over and run off with it, they were no longer the spearheaders of the pack of metal. And that's one of the big things that did when Dio was in there, and later incarnations, was a big problem for Sabbath, because other people did metal, modern, what we'd have called 80s metal, better than they did. And they were just part of the pack at that point. But in the 70s, they were the spearheaders. They were the ones leading the charge. And I think this is an interesting one because it is a transitional one. And I'd rather in a way, I'd like to do a couple of the later ones just before Ozzy left to see where it actually went. So we kind of know what the earlier Sabbath sounds like, because that's all the stuff that's on the greatest hits, but the latter stuff could be interesting. But yeah, there is some highs and lows depending on how you approach the album.
Yeah, I'm just going to challenge you on one thing.
Yeah.
And I hope I am not looking back retrospectively. I think there is a clear understanding of heavy metal by this time. And that 1971 album, really, well, they did two albums, didn't they, in 1971, but Master of Reality is the fucking heaviest album of the 70s, possibly even the heaviest album of the 80s in guitar music, because it's tuned so low, isn't it, to what we would now say is it drop C. So that album's incredibly heavy, and you are right. Around this time, 1975, I think it's just before this album, they actually do jam with Led Zeppelin, and John Bonham's like, "Come on, I want to jam on Supernaut from Sabbath Bloody Sabbath." And they admit they've started incorporating Deep Purple and Zeppelin back into their music. They're kind
Oh,
of
okay.
moving away from the dark, really low-tuned, heavy, what we would now call doom metal.
Yeah.
But let's be clear, there's still some up-tempo songs on their earlier stuff, isn't there? But yeah, this is, I don't call it a transition album. I think this actually does carry on moving away from that, and the right to do that. I think by the time you get to album number 6, you don't want another Master of Reality. They've done volume 4, which has got that song Changes on it, which is a piano-based song, isn't it? So they've started experimenting, and Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, they're probably thinking of taking it too far. This is very experimental, but my 3 high points, the stunning interplay between guitar and bass in the heavy songs. Sometimes it feels like Geezer Butler is playing around Iommi's riffs. And you know which band I'm going to mention who completely looked at that and thought, we're having that. Faith No More. They do exactly the same thing. There's so few bands though. Have you drink? There's so few bands that use the bass as creatively, and you can tell some of the songs that Geezer's been writing as well, rather than coming from Tony Iommi's guitar. The experimentation in the longer songs, even you said, Andy, didn't you? Megalomania, it's nearly 10 minutes. It doesn't feel overly long. And same with the last song, The Writ. They're worthy of the long running times. And I do like Tony Iommi's willingness to bring folk guitar into the songs to contrast with the heavy riffing. Clearly, that's where, influenced Metallica, didn't it? They started doing it on Ride the Lightning, bringing that element in. And I love the technicality of it. He's a virtuoso, actually, when you look at some of his movement on the fretboard during the folk songs. The weaknesses, the vocal lines, they, as you pointed out, Dave, they're too close to the guitar riffs. They're so rigid at times to the point where they need an equal number of words in each line just to stay within the boundaries. So there is absolutely no room for ad-libbing or even vibrato or anything like that. Yeah, there are other songs on here where he does let loose a bit. And am I going insane? Doesn't quite, the one song that doesn't quite fit the mood of the album for me. You're right, it's a bit flowery, isn't it? I do like the ending to it, but I just think it's the one song on there that probably is a filler, ironically, and it's only what, 4 minutes, 4 minutes in length. But what do you think? We've more or less talked about the opening song, "Hole in the Sky," haven't we? Which is a great intro. What do we think of the closing song though, "The Writ"? It's 8 minutes and 44 seconds.
Andy, I've talked about the Ritz, so I've kind
Yeah.
of got a talk on it. So what about Andy?
Um, my sort of summary for the album is this is clear because of the range of the experimentation, the different types of songs, the different sorts of passages, the bands that Sabbath have obviously influenced. I mean, there's the obvious ones, Trouble, Candlemass, Count Raven. You can see how those bands look at Sabbath and maybe this album and ones like it and sort of create their sound and the vocal line. I mean, the Writ you said sounded like Robert Plant. I'm no Led Zeppelin fan. I couldn't tell you anything apart from Stairway to Heaven. But Eric Wagner from Trouble was what came to mind when I heard, Ozzy's vocals on the Writ, because he does deliver each song slightly differently. The opening one, there's sort of power and a little bit more oomph. There's anguish and sort of slightly melancholy in others, but there's on this one, it's as you mentioned, one of you mentioned, sort of a slightly higher register. Lyrically, it's more imaginative than most of the other songs, as you said, Kirk. They follow the rhythm of the guitar, almost equal syllables. He uses the technique where lines 1 and 3 rhyme and 2 and 4 rhyme, or even one. There's 4 lines and there's rhymes. This one's a little bit more imaginative lyrically. There's a great riff at 4.5 minutes, but only repeats for 4 bars and is never heard again. That's a shame.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a nice sort of classical folk guitar sort of passage as well. So it's one of the better tracks for me. Again, it doesn't seem overlong at 8.5 minutes. It seems to sort of come across well. But it's not the strongest, but probably a decent enough one to finish the album.
Yeah, as I said in the intro video, they're embroiled in legal disputes throughout the whole of the recording process for this. And it's all on record. Geezer Butler, Ozzy, Tony Iommi, they actually do remember being served affidavits, when they're at the mixing desk. So it's the fact that he even got an album out is impressive. And lyrically, it's a clear attack on the former manager Patrick Meehan because the main line is "You bought and sold me with your lying words." They realise they're being ripped off by management. I mean, if you look at sales, worldwide sales of that Paranoid album, that shifted 12 million copies to this day. Probably shifted 5 million by here. They're not seeing anywhere near the percentage of money that they would expect. So yeah, it's an attack on the manager. I think the riff musically, this could be the Rolling Stones if you close your eyes. Very got a Mick Jagger feel to it, and then also just that simple rock and roll riff, but using a lot more fuzz and distortion in the guitars. And Tony Iommi he's moved away from that monstrous low end in his riffing, really, hasn't he? Apart from Symptom of the Universe, which is heavy as fuck, he is going in a more classic rock direction. Obviously, that didn't exist, classic rock. This is the beginning of rock, isn't it, this decade?
Yeah.
The bass, yeah, far more creative and louder in the mix, so that's why, you listen to AC/DC, Stones, all these great rock and roll bands, the bass is often innocuous, isn't it? Absolutely not with this band. I think things do get interesting. You're right, Andy. At 4 minutes 30, they threaten like a tempo change, and it doesn't even become a riff, does it? But you can see why this song and this album receives a retrospective identity with progressive rock, because I love those effulgent folk guitar passages at the 5 minute mark. I mean, like, where did they come from? It's almost like a disservice to call the melodies luscious. It's far beyond that. And even Ozzy moves away from the rigidity of his vocal lines. There is a lot of spontaneous ad-libbing towards the end, and I think he puts a lot into it because the band are jaded, they're drained by all the legal disputes, and you can hear that. I mean, the musicianship. What do you think of this, Dave? The musicianship on this album, have they dialed it back? Do they not know what they're doing? Is it classic Sabbath?
The problem you've got here is we're looking back on it retrospectively with all the knowledge of everything else that goes on in the world around us with all the other different bands. So we've got something to compare to. And I was just sitting there while you were talking there, and my mind was wandering as you were whittering on.
Our viewers were listening.
No, as I was paying the complete attention. No, as you were talking, it sort of got me thinking about, but what were their contemporaries? You were talking about the Rolling Stones. I'm thinking, right, 1975. Who's around there at the time when they're writing this 1974 into 75? They're writing this album. We all write when we're writing music. When Andy's writing, when I'm writing, etc. And we're in our band, we've got our influences of who's around us, and we have to be careful. Sometimes you start playing a riff, you're like, do you know what? That sounds a little bit too much like this band. That sounds a bit too much like this band. Who's that going to be with them? Because the reality is like, I sort of thought, well, when's Motorhead come out? And I was like, Motorhead had only just formed that year. They didn't bring their first album out till 77. So I'm like, well, you haven't got any natural peers. Yes, Zeppelin.
They're true pioneers, aren't they? That's why.
So all of these different things they're doing, they're taking influences from rock and roll, and they've got disco going on now around them. So they've got, and then obviously in 75, you're going to be getting some of the earlier punk stuff's going to be starting to get into that. You're going to get some punk coming in in the next couple of years, sort of thing. 77, 78, I guess. So there is a lot going on, but they're just literally just creating here. They are just coming up with stuff. They are pioneering, whether it works or not. Now, when you look back at it retrospectively, the other bands I would probably throw them as comparisons to would be maybe going back and going Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the Beatles. That's a band that went off and did it and made an amazing record. And it makes me think, when you think about this album, you go, this is what they're trying to do with some of their songs. They're trying to get this transitional journey with different passages and different moods on the same one song, but with lots of different vibes, which is the Beatles did very, very successfully. But not many other people. Everyone else was still like the Kinks and Rolling Stones were doing classic rock albums that we would call them classic rock and roll albums. But I think for Sabbath here, they are literally creating things out of nothing, and they're taking the stuff from rock and roll from the Beatles. They've got their love of what they've done heavy, and they are just literally going, slam that together, let's see what happens. And so you have to tip your hats to that.
Yeah, that's why I'd say Superstar. You thought it was not needed on this album. I mean, now you're right. We are looking back. You have to, don't you? And its influence and avant-garde metal, the likes of Neurosis and Get Your Glass Ready, Celtic Frost. That this is really the origins of it. You know, they brought in the English chamber choir. You've got these distorted chords, military drumming. You know, to me, it's like the type of thing you'd have. You know, the 1980 Superman film. They could have had that at the beginning, you know, with Lex Luthor.
Okay, yeah.
So epic. And I think it fits it well. That's why I like this album because I love it. There's so much experimentation. But you're right, Dave. Put it in its context. Yeah, you've got Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple are also playing really heavy guitar music. And because they're moving away, Black Sabbath, from the low-tuned, slower stuff, they are actually drawing from. They're probably their only two contemporaries. But you're right. They're in the dark here. There's nothing that's come before it. And that's what I love when I listen to the first six albums. But I mean, like the production to me, this just sounds like it was a very decadent decade, the 1970s. This has had money thrown at it, hasn't it? No matter what the legal disputes are, no expenses spared. And I think this production. Do you think, Andy, from that perspective? I know it's been remastered. Did you even think, oh, this is 1975? That guitar tone's quite heavy there, or wow, I can't believe amps were capable of this. Was there anything that stood out for you in that aspect?
Again, this is not my sort of strong area, you know, the production and the quality of recording, but it does sound of its time to me. You know, you play this to anybody in a list of other tracks by similar bands from different times, you know, 80s, 90s or whatever, 2000s. This sounds like the 70s recording to me. But it's a good 70s recording.
Yeah,
so
that's it.
you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. It has, you know, decent studio, decent producers. I don't know who was involved in the recording process, but it does sound like it's a well-funded and well-resourced recording for a 70s metal album.
I mean, if
But
you,
you can place it in that time period.
I mean, to give you an idea, if you listen to the first two Motorhead albums, so Motorhead and even Overkill, production on those is probably even Bomber. The production on those ones is not great. They didn't really get their production up until maybe when Ace of Spades came on, and they were like the first couple of albums of theirs, and they don't stand up. They sound of the time, but they don't stand up well. They need to be remastered. Whereas this one, yes, it's definitely, as you said, it sounds of the era, but it sounds like a really good one of the era. Same as like the Beatles when we said Sergeant Pepper's and the White Album, Revolver, stuff like that, Rubber Soul. You listen to those, you're like, they sound of their eras of the 60s, but they're really well produced. And they still stack up really well now, but you can just place them. We say the same about music videos and also music from the early 2000s. You go, that sounds like it's from the 2000s. The production at that sort of time, it's almost got its own like fingerprint. And I think music in the 70s, their production in the 70s had its own fingerprint.
Yeah, and do you know the next part we normally move to, because this is a vinyl record, isn't it? Side A and side B, very easy to demarcate between the two. Andy, what's the strongest, side A or side B for you?
Side A, without a doubt. I assume Megalomania closes side A.
Yeah, it does.
3 full tracks and 50 minutes of noodling. So it contains the three tracks that I've picked out as my favourites, and to me, you know, listen to it as a whole. I think they've gone into with 3 strong songs into the studio, into the recording studio, record an album, and they've filled it up with another 20 minutes of not as on par material. So yeah, side A for me.
Dave, what's the case for side B?
Side B is actually really good, but it doesn't sound like Sabbath that you expect. Side A sounds like Sabbath with Hole in the Sky. Hole in the Sky sounds like something that was written probably at the end of the previous album, but wasn't quite ready, and then was ready for the album. It was the first one they'd completed, ready to go, and then they were like, yeah, let's go. Sense of the Universe would be the second one they'd done. And then the rest of it kind of was almost freeform jammed in the studio, and they were like, that's a good song, that'll work as a song, that'll work as a song.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the thrill of it all, Am I Going Insane and The Writ, great tracks, but they don't sound like the classic Sabbath sound. And they don't stand out on their own. They're good songs, they rock out, and as I said, they've got that Led Zeppelin vibe. But you've got Led Zeppelin, and I'm not quite sure what they're adding music from a songwriting point of view. It just showed that they could write something other than Iron Man and War Pigs, etc., and Planet Caravan, and so yeah, I personally would still go with side A myself as the strongest side. It's got the strongest tracks on it.
Thrill of it all, Dave.
I do like side B, but I think side A is the stronger part of the album.
Thrill of it all, Dave. You mentioned there had
Yeah,
an AC/DC sort of feel to me, certainly from the beginning, and
yeah.
it to me also reminded me of sort of Ozzy's earlier solo material.
Hmm.
Like I say, that there's so much variety in the material, even within one song. It's not typical Sabbath, um, but yeah, those three sort of main tracks sort of stand out against everything else, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think side A just edges it. When I was looking at it, I was thinking, is it because side B is not as heavy? And then I realized when you listen to the thrill of it all, I know you mentioned AC/DC, and I don't know, they've not really, I don't know if they'd even be on the radar of Black Sabbath at this
No,
point.
that point.
But to me, if you listen to it, that's an early example of what we'd now call groove metal with that riff. Listen to the syncopation and the guitar rhythm, and everyone from Rage Against the Machine, King's X, even Red Hot Chili Peppers when they were a real rock band have borrowed from this song. I think that is a orgasmic guitar riff. I really do, but it has a bit of a what you would now call a glam rock flavor to it, doesn't it? And is it me? Is there a layer of brass instrumentation buried in the guitar distortion
I
to
don't
plot
know.
through the song? Every time I hear him, like, is that a trumpet in the background? So yeah, I'd go with side A, but I think side B is strong, and they have actually worked out. Can you imagine if side A was just all the heavy songs and then side B experimentation? You'd
Hmm.
be thinking, what is going on here? But I think they do a good job of actually structuring the album. But the question is, this is what everyone wants to know. I don't think there's going to be a consensus on this. Has this album stood the test of time? Dave, we've got to start with you. And you've got to give a verdict out of 10 as well.
Okay. Retrospectively, of its time, yes, it stands up. Against modern standards, I don't think it does because it doesn't. There have been so many people since this album now. So if you were trying to get someone into Sabbath, this is not an album I would give them. Um, I think they'd need a lot of like. It depends on what they're other listening. If they're like, "Oh, I'm into Dream Theater and I'm into other stuff," you might go, "Okay, well, this might be something you might get into." Um, yeah, I'm going to say no based on modern listening. For me, 6 out of 10. This album. I just, it just it misses the marks on too many places for it to get any higher than that. But there are some great tracks in there. But yeah, 6 out of 10 for me.
Now, this is the one I want to hear. Andy, verdict.
Pretty much echo what Dave said. To be honest, I think upon release, I think it probably would have had mixed reception from Sabbath fans. It's not one that you'd go back to for somebody wanting to find out the origins of metal and 70s Sabbath, but there are some good tracks on there. I don't really know what the definition of the question is. Does it stand up to the test of time? Yes, it's an album that fans will go back to. It is an album that you could recommend for somebody who does like their more experimental stuff rather than their sort of heads down metal or even doom. So I'd say yes, it does, because it is something that you can look back at and listen to again. There are some strong songs. There's a lot of rubbish in there, in my opinion. There's some bits that are in between that you can see what they're trying to do and does show the standard musicianship, especially Tony Iommi's sort of folk and clean and classic guitar parts that he does throughout the album on various songs. Overall rating 5 out of 10.
That sounds fair based on your analysis. To me, easily stands up. Am I weighing it too much towards its influence? Because 50 years later, the influence of this album is everywhere in metal, certainly the stuff that we've listened to over the last 30 years. Look at the bands that have covered songs from this album. So Machine Head, Overkill, and Pantera, they've covered Hole in the Sky. Venom have covered Megalomania. Sepultura, as you mentioned, Dave. Helmet, Orange Goblin, Melvins, they've all covered Symptom of the Universe. So we know it's got a big influence on thrash metal. I want again, don't underestimate its influence on what would become avant-garde metal. Celtic Frost, Neurosis, definitely drawing from this album. And the importance of early prog metal, Queensryche, Sabotage, that Florida band, clearly drawing from this album. So just for its universal influence alone, I must agree with you on some things you've said, both of you. You wouldn't recommend this as the first album to get into Black Sabbath. You'd definitely go for Paranoid or Master of Reality, the really heavy stuff. And perhaps I didn't see the filler because I love the first 5 albums and see this as completing this golden run of 6 albums. It's refreshing to me, because Sabbath Bloody Sabbath does start that, to be fair, and Volume 4 is quite underrated. Or probably not underrated, but because you've got these 6 genius records, 3 of them almost everyone agrees on. This is probably the hidden gem amongst them. I think it is better than Volume 4. I prefer it to Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, which precedes it. So for that reason, for me, this is an 8 out of 10 album. It stands up for me. So if we do an average,
6.5.
6.5 out of 10. So we, as a committee, this doesn't stand up, does it? If we go by that score, and I think you two have certainly given you reasons for that, and it's not one of the famous albums. So be interesting to know what people think about this.
Yeah.
Have we come to a harsh conclusion for this record?
Yeah, so let us know in the comments down below, what would you give a rating for this particular album? Let us know your thoughts about what the tracks we loved, the tracks that we didn't love so much, and check out our other album reviews. We've done so far: Paradise Lost, Draconian Times, and Corrosion
of
of
Conformity.
Deliverance album. And I can't remember what is it? Is it Devastation?
Destruction next.
Destruction
Yeah.
album. It shall be our next one to review. So yeah, keep an eye out for that one as well. And thank you very much for watching. Take care.